A boy's breath stops in a dusty upper room in Zarephath. A grieving mother carries her son out the gates of Nain, so that when the ultimate tomb is emptied in Jerusalem, humanity would know exactly how to read it. And he simply throws his voice into the dark. Lazarus, come out. Deep inside the pitch-black cave, corrupted tissue knits itself back together. Stagnant blood purifies and violently rushes through dry veins. Lungs expand, pulling in the stale air of the tomb. A shadow moves in the doorway, a man bound hand and foot in linen strips. His face covered with a burial cloth, shuffles out of the dark and into the blinding sunlight. This is not a delayed rescue. It is a total subjugation of the grave. Jesus is proving that the authority of his voice does not expire. When the human cells begin to break down, he is proving that the downward pull of Sheol can be shattered by a single spoken phrase, even after the dirt has settled. 3 times in the Old Testament, 3 times in the earthly ministry of Jesus. The pattern is complete. The grammar of the miraculous has been fully established. But right before this climax, standing outside this very tomb, before the stone was rolled away, Jesus looked at Martha and attached a brand new word to this reality. A word that changes resurrection from an event that happens to you into an identity that belongs to him. John chapter 11, verse 25. Before the heavy stone is rolled away, Jesus is standing on the hot, dusty road outside Bethany. To understand what happens on Easter morning, you cannot start at the empty tomb. You have to start almost 1,000 years earlier. Martha is weeping, her face streaked with dirt and grief. Jesus tells her that her brother will rise again, and Martha gives the standard, orthodox theological answer of a devout first-century Jewish woman. She says she knows her brother will rise in the resurrection on the last day. She views the reversal of death as a distant hope, a cosmic event locked safely. At the very end of the human timeline, Jesus looks at her and says, "I am the resurrection and the life." The word Jesus uses the word the Apostle John carefully records in his Greek manuscript is the noun Anastasis. It is a brilliant, explosive piece of vocabulary. It appears dozens of times in the New Testament, and its root is the Greek verb anastemi. It is a compound construction. Ana means up or upward. Histemi means to cause to stand, to set something upright, quite literally. Anastasis means a standing up again. It is the exact, precise Greek equivalent to the ancient Hebrew kum that we have been tracking from the dry upper room in Zarephath to the chaotic, mourning-filled bedroom of Jairus' daughter. It carries that same physical, gravity-defying image of a body rising vertically from the dirt. This is the word the early church will build its entire theology around. When Luke writes the book of Acts, and when Paul pens his, you have to step into a drought-starved town called Zarephath. The famine is absolute. A widow is gathering a few dry sticks. Dense theological arguments to the Romans. They do not just casually mention that Jesus came back to life. They use this specific noun, Anastasis, the standing up. But right here, outside the rotting tomb of Lazarus, Jesus does something completely unprecedented with this word. He does not tell Martha, "I will perform an anastasis." He says, "I am the Anastasis." This grammatical shift changes everything about how we are supposed to read the rest of the Bible. Martha assumed the resurrection was a scheduled event waiting on the calendar of human history. Jesus collapses the entire timeline into himself. Resurrection is not an event on a schedule. It is a person, it is a reality that is standing right in front of her, breathing the hot Judean air, with dust on his sandals. By claiming this noun as an identity, Jesus is declaring that wherever he walks, the downward pull of death is fundamentally canceled. The grave loses its structural integrity the moment the Anastasis steps into the cemetery. He does not just have the power to reverse death. His very presence is the antithesis of the pit. Lazarus comes out of the tomb because the sheer proximity of the Anastasis makes it impossible for him to stay horizontal. But raising Lazarus was only a demonstration. It was a preview of the ultimate reversal. To permanently shatter the architecture of death, the Anastasis himself, to bake one final, desperate meal for her son before they starve to death. Instead, a prophet named Elijah arrives. The jar of flour that would have to let the Romans nail him to wood, let the blood drain from his veins, and let his own body be laid flat in the dark. And when he stands up 3 days later, he does not stand up alone. Friday afternoon, the sky over Jerusalem turns black at noon. A man exhales for the final time on a wooden cross. The earth violently shudders. The thick temple curtain tears from top to bottom, and the limestone graves break open. Matthew records it in just a few rapid-fire sentences. It is the strangest, a most chaotic resurrection account in the biblical record. The bedrock fractures. The tombs open. The bodies of many holy people who had died suddenly stand up. They wait for Sunday. They walk into the city. They appear to the crowds. It is a mass jailbreak from Sheol. When the Anastasis yields his spirit, the shockwave of his death breaks the physical containment of the cemetery itself. Death cannot hold its prisoners while the author of life is descending into the pit. Then comes Sunday morning. No prophet paces the floor. No mother pleads for a miracle. No one stretches their living body over the cold flesh. And the jug of oil miraculously multiply. And they survive the famine. The tension breaks. The danger passes. But then, the unthinkable happens. The lungs expand. The heart beats. The linen strips collapse flat against the cold stone slab. Jesus of Nazareth stands up in the dark. He folds the face cloth. He walks out into the damp morning air. He shatters the cycle. Every resurrection before this one carried a tragic expiration date. Lazarus stood up, but his cells eventually broke down again. The widow's son inhaled, but his lungs still had to wither and die a second time. Jairus' daughter walked around the room, but the earth eventually reclaimed her bones. The Shunammite's son lived a full life, only to be buried in the exact same dirt that held Elisha. They were brought back. He goes through. This is not a resuscitation. It is a glorification. He walks out carrying a completely new kind of human existence, a body that mortality can no longer touch, age, or bury. The stone is not a barrier he has to break. It is a door he leaves open. The grave is entirely empty. The ancient pattern of Qum has reached its ultimate, cosmic fulfillment. The Anastasis has spoken the final word over the dust. 7 specific, individual resurrections led up to this weekend, culminating in the chaotic group rising of the saints. The text tells us the boy falls sick. The Hebrew is brutally clinical. His illness becomes so severe that there is no breath left in his lungs. And the triumphant, permanent exit of the Savior. But the timeline of death being reversed is still not finished. There are exactly 2 more resurrections recorded in the text. Because before Jesus ascends into heaven, he delegates his authority to a frightened group of fishermen and a former Pharisee. And they are about to walk into upper rooms of their own. When you trace the history of the early church in the book of Acts, you notice a profound shift in how the miraculous operates. Jesus has ascended. The Anastasis is no longer physically walking the dusty roads of the Mediterranean. But the pattern of the gravity-breaking Qum does not stop. It simply transfers to the hands of ordinary, flawed men. The final 2 resurrections recorded in the Bible are not performed by the Messiah, but by his delegates. And the detail that changes how you read these final accounts is the deliberate, almost painstaking way they mirror the past. Peter is summoned to the coastal town of Joppa. A beloved disciple named Tabitha has died. When Peter walks into the upper room, he is surrounded by weeping widows, holding up the physical evidence of her life, tunics and robes. The mother's grief is jagged. Her accusation toward the prophet is sharp, bitter, and fully understandable, woven with the precise, repetitive sting of a bone needle pulling thread. Peter does exactly what he watched his rabbi do years earlier. He clears the chaotic room. He gets down on his knees, and he speaks to the corpse in Aramaic. Her name is Tabitha. The command to rise is Qum. Tabitha Qum. It is exactly one letter different from the phrase Jesus used to wake Jairus' daughter. Years later, the Apostle Paul is preaching in a crowded, suffocating third-story room in Troas. The air is heavy with the smoke and heat of dozens of flickering oil lamps. A young man named Eutychus falls fast asleep on the windowsill, loses his balance, and plunges out into the dark. You can hear the heavy, sickening thud of his body hitting the hard stone street below. He is picked up dead. Paul rushes down the stairs. And he does not just speak to the boy. He throws his own living body over the broken corpse, wrapping his arms around the dead flesh, mirroring the exact physical posture Elijah and Elisha used centuries earlier. The pulse returns. The boy lives. These final 2 moments in the biblical record complete a perfect theological circle. The apostles are not generating their own power. They are deploying a borrowed authority. They are using the exact linguistic and physical grammar that God spent 1,000 years writing into human history. The provision of the flower feels like a cruel joke if the boy is just going to die in his bed anyway. The resurrection is no longer isolated to the presence of a single prophet, and it is no longer waiting for the end of the world. It is actively pushing back the boundaries of death in the present tense, carried forward by the church. 10 physical resurrections, 10 bodies pulled upward from the pit. But all of this historical analysis leaves one final, deeply uncomfortable question hanging in the room. What happens when it is your turn to face the dirt? A prophet stands in a suffocatingly dry valley. The ground is completely covered in human skeletons, bleached white by the blistering sun, brittle to the touch, fragmented, dead for a very long time. God asks him a terrifying question. Can these bones live? The prophet speaks to the wind, and the noise begins. A low, violent rattling echoes off the canyon walls. Bones violently snap into place. Sinew tightly wraps around dry joints. Muscle immediately covers the marrow. Skin stretches over the flesh. The breath of the 4 winds slams into their hollow lungs. A vast, unnumbered army stands up on their feet. Gum. They stand upright. The prophet Ezekiel recorded this vision as a promise to a broken, exiled nation. He watched the absolute reversal of decay in real time. But this ancient, rapid-fire vision points directly to the phantom grave, waiting for every single one of us. Elijah does not offer a theological defense. He does not try to explain the mysterious ways of the divine. He takes the dead boy from her arms. We act as if the grave is the most permanent piece of real estate on earth. We seal our dead in heavy steel vaults and lower them into the cold ground, assuming the story has reached its unalterable conclusion. The grave is not a permanent vault. It is a temporary holding cell. We are a species haunted by our own expiration dates. We buy insurance. We run on treadmills to stave off the inevitable moment when our knees buckle and gravity reclaims its dirt. Your body is carrying the anxiety of that downward pull right now, held tight in your chest and your jaw. Death is not just a future event. It is the heavy, invisible gravity pulling at your present. But maybe the part that stays with me most is not the sheer, overwhelming scale of these 10 biblical resurrections. It is the terrifyingly gentle intimacy of how they happen. Elijah stretches his own warm body over a cold child in an upper room. Elisha closes the door and paces the floorboards, waiting for the flesh to warm. Jesus takes a dead 12-year-old girl by the hand. Jesus stands weeping outside a tomb that smells like 4 days of rot, his own face wet with tears. Before he throws his voice into the dark, Paul wraps his arms around a broken, bleeding boy on the dark cobblestones of Troas. The God of the universe does not reverse death from a safe, sterile distance. He gets down in the dirt with the corpse. He climbs the stairs to the upper room. He lays the child on his own bed. He stretches his own living body over the cold. And that intimate reality changes how we have to look back at the entire arc of this pattern. A widow handed over her breathless son, and the downward pull of the grave was broken. A mother rode 20 miles to Mount Carmel, and cold flesh grew warm in a silent upper room. A corpse was hurled onto dry bones, and the residue of the divine forced a dead man to his feet. A little girl lay still amidst the wailing, and the creator of the universe spoke Aramaic to her hand. A funeral procession marched toward the dirt, and the Anastasis stopped the burial with a single word. A heavy stone was rolled away from 4 days of rot, and a bound man shuffled into the blinding sun. The author of life descended into the pit, and he walked out on a Sunday morning carrying a glorified body that mortality can never touch again. 10 resurrections. 1 vocabulary. But here is the part I keep coming back to. The stone in Bethany. The dry bones of Elisha. The upper room in Zarephath. They were all pointing to the moment when Jesus looked at Martha and changed the noun into an identity. He is the Anastasis. A little girl's hands grow cold in a Galilean house filled with the sound of wailing mourners. Still body of the child 3 times. And he cries out to God to let the boy's life return. This is a staggering moment. Resurrection is not a date on a calendar. It is a person. If you are in a season where the gravity of your life has pulled you down to the floor, if grief, or a crushing failure, or a terrifying diagnosis has completely flattened you, and you do not have the strength to stand back up, hear the grammar of the miraculous. The Anastasis does not ask you to generate your own pulse. He does not ask you to pull yourself out of the pit by your own willpower. He asks you to let him step into the room. He asks you to let him take your hand. He speaks the come. If this opens something in you today, subscribe. Leave a comment. Even 1 word helps. Share this with someone who feels buried under the weight of their current season and needs to remember that the grave does not have the final word. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. And may the God who has never once surrendered a human life permanently to the dirt walk into your deepest darkness, take you by the hand, and command your spirit to rise. It is the first time in the recorded history of Scripture that anyone asks God to reverse human death. Abraham did not ask for it when Sarah died. Jacob did not ask for it when he buried Rachel. Nobody has ever seen this happen. There is no theological precedent. But Elijah asks, and the room shifts. The lungs expand. The breath enters the boy. He opens his eyes. It is a beautiful restoration. But the detail that begins the entire pattern of resurrection in the Bible is not the return of breath. It is the specific, a physical action that happens the moment life is restored. When a human body expires, biology dictates a specific, universal direction. It goes down. Gravity reclaims its property. The spine loses its tension. The knees buckle. And the weight of a lifeless form settles onto the woven reeds of a bed or the cold grit of a burial cave. The ancient Hebrew imagination understood death profoundly as a descent. The grave is Sheol, the pit, the place below, the dark underground. To be dead is to be horizontal. A stone rolls back from a tomb that already smells like 4 days of rot. The breath returns. The eyes open. The dead stand up, pulled helplessly back into the dirt from which the first man was formed. But when you track the language of these 10 resurrections through the text, a distinct anatomical pattern begins to form. The primary Hebrew verb that pulses beneath these accounts is the word kum. It is a common, everyday word. It means to arise, to stand up, to be lifted from a state of prostration. Resurrection in the biblical framework is not simply the return of a pulse. It is a postural defiance. It is the sudden, jarring motion of a body that has been flattened by the crushing weight of mortality snapping back into a vertical stance. You can feel this tension in the air of that upper room in Zarephath. When Elijah carries the boy down the stairs and hands him back to his mother, the child is not just breathing. He has been raised. He has been pulled from the downward trajectory of the pit and forced to stand upright in the sunlight. You see this word kum everywhere in the Hebrew Scriptures, usually in completely mundane contexts. A judge rises to take his seat. A soldier stands up for battle. A weary traveler gets up from the dirt. But here, injected directly into the vocabulary of death, it takes on cosmic weight. God is defining exactly what he intends to do with the grave. Same impossible reversal. Again and again. There are exactly 10 resurrections recorded in the biblical text. He is not going to just comfort the grieving while leaving the dead in the ground. He is going to reverse the fundamental posture of humanity. Every time a biblical author records a return from death, they are painstakingly documenting this upward. Gravity-breaking motion. The body that went down must come up. This is the grammar of the miraculous. It is a language being spoken across centuries, setting a precedent that will eventually echo in a garden outside Jerusalem. But Elijah's frantic, desperate intervention in that upper room is only the first syllable of the sentence. It proves that the downward pull of death can be interrupted if a prophet of God is standing right there, stretching his own warm body over the cold skin of the dead. It leaves a terrifying question hanging in the air. What happens when the prophet is not there when the breathing stops? Decades later, Elijah's successor is about to find out, and the next timeline of death he has to face is not measured in minutes, but in miles. A boy cries out in a grain field beneath a blinding summer sun, "My head, my head." A servant carries him home. A mother holds him on her lap until noon. The breathing stops. The body goes cold. She does not weep. 3 in the Old Testament. 3 performed by Jesus. 3 performed by the apostles. And one that shatters the entire framework. She saddles a donkey. She rides 20 miles of rough, dusty road to Mount Carmel. She finds the prophet Elisha. She grabs his feet. She refuses to let go. Elisha follows her back. He walks into the suffocating quiet of the bedroom. He shuts the door. He paces the floor. He stretches his body over the corpse. The flesh grows warm. The boy sneezes 7 times. The eyes open. The body stands up. The stakes are escalating. Elijah reversed death immediately. Elisha reverses it hours later, closing a 20-mile gap of time and decay. But the pattern does not stop there. The pattern accelerates. Decades pass. Elisha grows old. The prophet dies. His body is wrapped in linen and sealed in a stone cave. The flesh rots away. The bones dry out in the dark. Spring arrives, and with it, Moabite raiders. An Israelite burial party is carrying a recently deceased man to his grave. They hear the shouting. They see the armed raiders cresting the ridge. Panic sets in. They do not have time to dig the hard dirt. They do not have time for the sacred burial rituals. They drag the heavy corpse to the nearest open tomb and hurl it into the shadows. It happens to be Elisha's grave. Most people assume these stories are just a random collection of power displays. We treat them as isolated miracles. The dead flesh hits the dry, brittle bones of the prophet, and immediately, the text says, the man revives. He stands up on his feet. Cum. This is not a ghost story. It is a theological escalation. God is proving that his power over the grave does not require the prophet to be breathing. The residue of the divine presence lingering on dry bones is enough to pull a man out of the pit and force him vertically onto his feet. The grave is losing its absolute authority. Death is becoming porous. The Old Testament gives us exactly these 3 resurrections. 3 strikes against the finality of the dirt. And then, the prophets go silent. Centuries of quiet pass. Empires rise and fall. The Roman legions pave their stone roads over the hills of Israel. Greek becomes the language of the street markets. The ancient miracles fade into synagogue liturgy, until a rabbi walks into a house full of professional mourners in Galilee. He looks down at the pale, a still body of a 12-year-old girl, and he speaks 2 words that pull the ancient pattern directly into the present. Mark chapter 5, verse 41. Jesus is in the house of Jairus, a desperate synagogue leader. The air is thick with the smell of myrrh and the shrill, chaotic weeping of professional mourners who know exactly what a corpse looks like, scattered across centuries to prove that God is stronger than biology. But if you read them in order, if you look at the exact, Jesus clears the room. He walks over to the bed, takes the 12-year-old girl by the cold hand, and speaks. Mark is writing his gospel in Greek for a Roman audience. He translates almost everything. But here, he pauses the translation. He leaves the original phrase intact, transcribing it exactly as it sounded in the suffocating quiet of that room. Talitha kum. The second word Jesus uses is the Aramaic kum. It is the direct, linguistic descendant of the ancient Hebrew root kuam, the very same word we saw echoing through the Old Testament resurrections. It means to stand upright, to be lifted from a state of prostration. The witnesses in that room did not just remember a miracle, they remembered the exact phonetics. They remembered the shape of the vowels Jesus used to command the dead, and that ancient echo changes everything. Think about the contrast. Elijah had to stretch his body over the widow's son and cry out to God for the come to happen. Elisha had to pace the wooden floorboards, wait, and stretch himself over the boy a second time before the warmth returned. Jesus does not pace. He does not plead with the heavens. He speaks to the dead girl with the casual authority. Hebrew and Greek words the writers chose to describe these moments. You start to see something the random miracle reading completely misses, of a parent waking a sleeping child. Jesus is not just performing a miracle of compassion. He is establishing his jurisdiction. If hearing these ancient linguistic echoes makes the text come alive for you, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So the little girl stands up. She begins to walk around the room. Jesus tells the shocked parents to give her something to eat, profoundly physical. Earthy detail. The gravity of death bends to his voice. He repeats this exact authority later. Outside the town of Nain, he stops a funeral procession, touches the wooden bier carrying a widow's dead son, and issues the exact same command. Young man, Ariz, kum, and the dead man immediately sits up and begins to speak. 2 resurrections, 2 commands, 2 bodies pulled upward from the pit. But both of these individuals had been dead for only a matter of hours. The blood had stopped, but the decay had not yet ravaged the tissue. The timeline was short. To definitively break the architecture of death, Jesus has to prove his authority over the rot itself. And to do that, he is going to deliberately let the clock run out. These 10 events are not isolated parlor tricks. They are a vocabulary. They are God building a language. Word by word, century by century, a stone seals a cave in Bethany. Inside, the air is thick with the sharp, sickening sweet smell of myrrh and decomposition. Outside, a sister stands weeping in the suffocating heat of a Judean afternoon. 4 days. This is the timeline that changes everything. Jairus' daughter was dead for hours. The widow's son at Nain was dead for hours. But in the first century Jewish understanding of mortality, the soul was believed to hover near the body for 3 days, hoping to re-enter. On the 4th day, the color of the face changes. The decay takes root. The soul departs. 4 days is not a medical emergency. It is a permanent biological reality. And Jesus arrives late. He arrives deliberately late. He stands before the rock. He weeps. And then he commands the heavy stone to be rolled away. The crowd of mourners goes completely silent. Martha protests. The stench will be unbearable. The rot has already claimed his flesh. Lord, by this time there is a bad odor. But Jesus does not look at the decay. He looks at the dark opening of the pit. He does not stretch his body over the corpse like Elijah. He does not pace the floorboards like Elisha. He does not touch a cold hand like he did for the little girl. He stands completely outside the jurisdiction of death.